La transición energética es una realidad sobre la cual el mundo entero está comprometido. El gas LP tiene un papel importante en la canasta energética para esa transición e implica una gran oportunidad para acabar con la pobreza energética. Gas LP, energía limpia. Este será el tema a tratar enseguida por un importante conferencista que llegó desde París, Francia, James Rockall, CEO de World LPG Association. Bienvenido nuevamente.
Right. Sorry about that, but it looks like my slides have been found. So once again, good morning. It's great to be here. I want to talk in this opening session about humanizing energy. Humanizing energy is about putting people at the heart of our energy transition. And I think it aligns extremely well, and it wasn't planned, very well, with the theme of your event this week. Energy poverty is a reality. It exists for literally billions of people all across the world every day. Not a day passes where we don't hear about climate change in the news. Climate change is also becoming a reality. And this reality of climate change is having an impact on the energy sector, a regulatory impact on the energy sector across the world, and it's certainly impacting the LPG sector. There is no doubt that the global energy landscape is changing. It's changing faster than it's ever changed in our history. In COP26 late last year in the UK, it brought a new and stronger focus on the decarbonisation of energy systems. And clearly, fossil fuels are in the crosshairs, particularly coal and oil, and to a lesser extent as well, gas. The changes that we see are driven by policies. Many countries, such as Colombia, have committed now to net zero carbon by 2050. And you hear electrification of everything as being a sort of comfort blanket that will solve all of our future ills. But is that true? What about hard to electrify areas? What about existing gas appliances, as an example, which are owned by billions of consumers across the world? What about the massive infrastructure that's already been made, the investment infrastructure that's already been made by thousands of companies in LPG distribution? Is this the right policy, electrification of everything? I think not. Energy is also being impacted by geopolitical events. The war in Europe is causing big supply challenges, particularly for natural gas. And this is where LPG has an opportunity because it's far less vulnerable to those kind of grid interruptions. As we emerge from COVID, and fortunately we are emerging from COVID, we have spiraling energy prices in the wake of the war in the Ukraine. But it's people who are suffering in an unprecedented cost of living crisis, which is stretching an already very burdened public debt. And this is impacting governments across the world, and you're going to see governments across the world falling because of this. Just witness what's happening in the UK right now. So, in this rapidly changing landscape, you may ask yourself, well, where does LPG fit in? What's our role in the future? Well, the answer is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. LPG is unique. It adds value in all markets. It doesn't matter what stage of development you are. It is more efficient and it can reduce emissions right across the globe. And it doesn't matter what level of maturity you are, in which country you are, what energy transition pathway you're on. There's going to be a role for LPG, an important role for LPG in each of those in each of those places. So in this context, how can LPG be part of the solution for sustainable energy transitions? And remember that sentence, sustainable energy transitions. This is the theme of our new 3-year plan. You're the first people to hear it outside our own team, and it will be launched in New Delhi at our event next month. But for the coming 3 years, we're focusing on the theme of LPG as a solution for sustainable energy transitions, plural. We need our future energy systems to be acceptable, they need to be accessible, they need to be available, and they need to be affordable. Now, defining what acceptable is quite difficult, but it may be better to say, what does unacceptable look like? And unacceptable is what we've got now in many parts of the world. 4.2 million people are dying every year because of outdoor air pollution. Here's a picture of New Delhi. If you go indoors, you can't escape it. 3.8 million people are dying every day because of household air pollution, principally coming from cooking. Acceptability, of course, is also related to carbon emissions. And 83 countries have now set up net zero CO2 targets, as I said before, including Colombia. Now, the good news is that we are improving. This graph is showing CO2 emissions per capita from a number of major economies, and generally you can see that the figures are coming down. What's really interesting, I think, for this audience is right at the bottom there is Colombia. Colombia with an emission of 5.4 tons of CO2 per person per year. That puts it at number 137 in the world. That means there are 136 countries in the world that are worse than you, and there are far fewer countries that are better than you. So I think Colombia should already be proud of its emissions profile. LPG can support low-carbon energy transitions already, right now, with conventional LPG. But as the world drives for deeper and deeper decarbonisation, we need some innovation in our fuel itself. And I want to talk just a little bit about that. In 2020, we created a global working group to look at the issue of how do we accelerate the production of renewable, I'm not going to say LPG because it would be contradictory to talk about renewable petroleum, but renewable propane, renewable butane, and also renewable other molecules. We have about 50 people in this group, and their target was to demonstrate that by 2050, 50% of the non-chemical demand, so the use of LPG as a fuel, in the world could be met with renewable LPG. We looked at what the pathways were out there were. We looked at what value this product would have, what the cost of production would be. Now, when we set that target of 50% by 2050, a lot of people said that's crazy, that's far too ambitious. But I don't think it was, in hindsight. I think, maybe it was not even ambitious enough. The EU wants to be 100% carbon neutral by 2050. The UK and Ireland want to be 100% carbon neutral by 2040. In California, it's 2040, and people are even now talking about 2030. Good news is we do have a solution. First one I want to talk about quickly is bio-LPG. Bio-LPG is identical to LPG. It comes from renewable biological sources such as waste oils. And being identical, it's a drop-in. We call it a drop-in solution to existing appliances. You can have CO2 emissions of up to 80% lower. And we can decarbonize our economies using this without the consumer cost of replacing appliances or the distributor costs of new infrastructure. And this is really, really important if you want to put people at the heart of the transition. Now, the good news is that by the end of last year, we demonstrated the reality that we can meet. We can meet more than 50% of our 2050 demand. In fact, in certain scenarios, we think we can meet 100% of future demand. And this is all with propane and butane, and it doesn't include a new molecule, which is dimethyl ether. And you're going to hear more about this in I think, tomorrow's session. I won't go into too much detail, but DME, as we call it, is very similar to propane. You see the molecule there, it has an oxygen atom in the middle. Very similar physical properties. It's been around for over 50 years as a propellant for aerosols, so it's very well known. It can be blended into existing LPG. It can have, on its own, actually a negative carbon intensity. So this provides a very interesting option for us to quickly decarbonize our energy systems. Now, renewable DME is not the only fuel innovation that we're looking at. You hear a lot about green ammonia. You hear a lot about green hydrogen. We're looking at both of these molecules to see what role they may play in future LPG distribution. And there's not a lot more I want to talk about right now on that, except for you to remember that it's not all about liquefied petroleum gas. Now, if we want to achieve sustainable energy transitions, it's not just about the fuel, it's also about the appliances that we use to burn that fuel. And I want to give you just a few examples of particular appliances from around the world so that you can appreciate the great future that our industry has in certain areas. I want to start with something that's fairly close to home for you, Chile. Chile is the second largest salmon producer after Norway. It has 300 offshore farms. WLPGA member Gasco, who's also active in this market, is implementing a switch of power generation of these farms from diesel to LPG. I don't want to go into all the details here. You can see that it reduces costs, it reduces CO2, and it reduces the risk of spills. But this is just an example of one country on one end user segment. Fishing and fish farms across the world are growing as we look for sustainable agriculture solutions. And as it grows, they're not going to want to fuel these fish farms with diesel. They're going to want to fuel these fish farms, we hope, with LPG. So I think this is a big opportunity. Staying with Chile, but we see a lot of growth, of course, in renewable electricity, principally from wind and from solar. But the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. But the demand for electricity is fairly constant. So we need backup, and it's recognized that we need backup. And I think it's really encouraging that in Chile, the preferred backup, preferred over liquid natural gas, was LPG. And this is a significant installation, the 45 megawatt plant, that we will see, I'm sure, replicated in many, many parts of the world as LPG becomes a complement to renewables and renewable electricity. The other big success story that we've seen in the last few years is marine. There was an independent analysis done on future fuels for marine, what's good and what's bad about all the different options. And what's really interesting is LPG didn't have any disadvantages. LPG was the only fuel, potential future fuel, that was seen to have advantages. LPG now fuels 40 LPG carriers across the world. That's gone up from nothing in the last 3 years, so this is a significant growth. There are over 100 right now on order as retrofits or as new builds. In fact, we believe that by 2028, all new carriers, LPG carriers, will be fueled by LPG. But close to the end of this decade, we're going to start making inroads into the container market. 30% of container vessels could be fueled by LPG by the end of this decade. And it's not just container ships, and it's not just LPG tankers. Also think about the fishing fleet across the world. Think about the outboard motor fleet that powers all those small vessels which produce an enormous amount of local pollution. LPG is a very simple and quick solution, and this is something that we certainly see growing. The next segment I want to look at, and that's something that you do have here, and it is an opportunity, is LPG as a vehicle fuel. You probably all know about autogas, but it offers an immediate solution to cleaning the air, principally cleaning the air in urban areas. But it's also one of the lowest greenhouse gas fuels of all commercially available fuels. It's the world's most popular alternative fuel. And we believe, right now we have about 25 million tons of LPG which is going into this segment. If the right policies are in place in countries around the world, we believe this could grow to 60 million tons by 2040. Just as an aside, there's only, I think, 5 countries right now account for half of the global consumption. And those are 5 countries that have got the right policies in place to encourage market development. So if we can develop new countries with new policies, we can rapidly see, I believe, the uptake of LPG as an automotive fuel. And that brings me on to the last segment, which I think is really important in today's context, particularly here in Colombia, is the use of LPG in domestic settings. I mentioned it in my introduction, but it's worth repeating. 3.8 million people die prematurely every year due to exposure to smoke from household air pollution, principally from cooking. It kills, you see on the graph here, more than the people who die from malaria, HIV/AIDS, and tuberculosis. And with only 10% of what we currently spend trying to combat those 3 diseases, we could essentially eliminate the deaths from indoor air pollution from cooking by providing access to LPG. So, as I said before, it's an extremely good measure for health intervention. We started a program in 2015 called Cooking for Life. Cooking for Life aims to switch 1 billion people across the world from cooking with traditional fuels to cooking with LPG by 2030. If we can achieve it, well, firstly, we'll be able to increase our global sales by 30 million tons a year with all those new customers. But what's really important is to remember we can avoid 1 million deaths per year. LPG will avoid 1 million deaths per year. Now, this program started in 2015. We're over halfway through it. We've already switched over 500 million people across the world, which means we're probably saving already every year 500,000 premature deaths. And I think that's something that we should be very proud of. In fact, that's something which, it helps me get out of bed in the morning and go to work when I know that that is one of the things that our industry is doing. So let me just close out my global presentation by just reminding you of what the LPG value proposition really is. Firstly, it's available right now, unlike most renewable alternatives. It can go everywhere, and I mean literally everywhere. Up the highest mountain to the most remote village. You see a picture here taken from India of how LPG can get to remote villages which are off the road, not even just off the gas grid. We have an extensive and reliable infrastructure already in place with billions of dollars invested across the world, and it delivers LPG today and it can deliver renewable LPG tomorrow. As the world becomes more and more electrified, it's going to need a partner, and LPG can be that reliable partner for renewable electricity. But it can also be a renewable solution all on its own, with renewable LPG and with renewable DME. There's very little investment, public investment, in new infrastructure if we continue with the LPG pathway. I think that's really important to governments across the world right now. And also, don't forget that the energy revolution is not new. Energy revolutions are happening all the time. They have been happening. But our industry has always been in the driving seat, and it has been for decades. Our future will be a challenge, but I believe that our product and our industry will continue to deliver exceptional energy today and tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to just end by reminding you that this theme, humanizing energy, is the theme of our World LPG Week, which is taking place in New Delhi from the 14th of November. If you haven't already signed up for it, I encourage you to do so, because this is where all of these discussions are going to be happening, and it would be tremendous value for you to take part. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you and answering any questions later. Thank you.